Developing realistic tactical objectives and plans is both an art and a science. For new and inexperienced incident commanders, this can be a formidable task, one that is littered with pitfalls. Recognizing those pitfalls and avoiding them is a step in the right direction to becoming a successful, safe, and effective IC. We will hear from an experienced IC about how he develops his plans and objectives, and we will join an IC as they work through the problems commonly found on any fire. Todd Jenkins has been a smoke jumper for 16 years and is currently the training manager for the Great Basin Smoke Jumpers in Boise, Idaho. He will be discussing the many considerations that an IC needs to take into account during planning.
Who's in charge of the fire that I'm going to? Am I the person that's going to be in charge? Or what is my role going to be? What other resources are responding? What information do I know about the fire right now? What size is it? What's the terrain that it's burning in? What are the fuel types that it's burning in? What are the weather conditions currently and expected? And what's expected of me from the land manager. You know, there's certain pieces of information that land manager is going to need. Most critically, they're going to want to know what the weather conditions are on site, what the terrain is at the fire location and out in front of the fire in the direction in which you think the fire is going to grow. They want to know, well, what resources you have on hand and what resources you think you're going to need to contain the fire to whatever size the land manager is looking for. And it's very critical that as the incident commander, you paint a good picture for that duty officer, because they can't see what's going on in front of you. And the better you are at verbalizing that to them, the better decision they're going to be able to make on how they want to proceed with that fire. If the land manager is giving you competing objectives, you need to be very clear and concise with the land manager that you do not understand the objectives. They're unclear to you, and they need to be spelled out more clearly. If they're competing objectives, then I think you need to work on painting that better picture for the land manager so that that land manager fully understands what you're dealing with and that you aren't going to be able to accomplish two competing objectives on that fire.
Okay, so I'm the IC. I'll meet the 2 engines dispatch is already sent to the fire, which is supposedly at a quarter acre and burning in grass, sage, and timber. I have some water around in ponds and streams, so I might have a dip spot handy. There's a cold front coming through this afternoon, and the flat the fire is in gets into steep terrain quick. I'll give the duty officer a better size up when I get there. The GAC is at PL4, and we're at National PL3, so crew and aviation resources are tight. That's something to consider as far as ordering more resources and the lead time to the fire. Duty Officer Tracy, this is the Hot Gates IC on command. The fire is actively burning in grass, sage, and timber. It's now about an acre. Spread potential is high once it gets into the steep section of the timber. Winds are 5 to 8 out of the west. RH is at 21%. There's a horse corral and a small stable a quarter-mile away to the south that might be threatened if there's a wind shift. The fire's on the forest and next to the wilderness area, which is farther upslope in the timber. Access is by 2-track I drove in on. How would you like me to proceed?
Now that our IC has his objectives from the duty officer, he can begin to set up his objectives and plan for the fire. Here are some ideas about resilience, the time wedge, alternative plans, and resource ordering that can enhance resilience in plan development.
The time wedge concept, I mean, yeah, it's fairly, I guess, intuitive, I guess you would say. When you're at the fat end of the wedge, when you have a lot of time to develop that plan, that's a comfortable situation. Once you get down to that sharp point of the wedge where critical decisions need to be made, then hopefully you spent a significant amount of time at the fat end of the wedge to develop those ideas and concepts, and that you had those contingency plans in place. When you first arrive on scene, you've painted that picture to the land manager. They have a good understanding of what's going on out there. They've given you the objectives for the fire. You're using that OODA loop, which is observe, orient, decide, and act. And now you're using that same OODA loop to develop your primary plan and your contingency plan. If you're married to your plan, it means you don't have alternatives. That is what has to happen, and there's nothing else that you can fall back on. We plan on always getting the things that we ask for, and the weather stays as predicted. and you got to avoid falling into that trap. Make sure that you're basing your actions on the probability that some things aren't going to go as you did plan, and that you have a backup plan for that. Getting feedback from your buddies or other people on the fire definitely should be an SOP. Hopefully that is the time that you're allowing for those dissenting voices to come out, that you have people that you trust on your fire, or resources that are there that are giving you good feedback. When you're able to batch your resource orders together, that means that you have a good, robust plan, and you've thought things through, and you're not piecemealing things. If you find yourself piecemealing orders to dispatch or to the land manager, I think you should look back and say, okay, what is my plan, and why wasn't I able to consider that earlier? Building a personal pre-order is a very valuable concept. You know that if you are being ordered as a Type 3 IC and you're going to be going to a desert fire, you should have a tickler list in mind saying, well, how much food am I going to need for the resources that I'm planning on ordering? How much water am I going to need? You know, keep all those things in the back of your mind, and as you get more experienced as an IC, you start to have those ticklers in your mind.
I'll run through all my contingencies now while the slow pace of the decision cycle allows it. I'll also have some time to put together some backup plans in addition to the basic plan of point protection and anchor, flank, and pinch. My trigger points for reassessment are going to be changes in fire behavior and if we are meeting the objectives or not. Better run this by Eastwood and see what she thinks before I brief everybody. Hey, Eastwood, come over here. I want to run something by you. Okay, so this is the plan. What do you think? Thanks, Eastwood. I appreciate your ideas on this. I'll make some changes. Better put that resource order list together and make sure it supports the plan for the next 4 days. And if I get it out now, it'll give dispatch time to get the resources here when I need them.
I think that it would be important to stress to people that you're transmitting those trigger points to that some trigger points require immediate action, and some trigger points would require a reassessment of what your actions are. There's probably very few times when you would reach a trigger point that would require immediate action. If you're setting your trigger points at that stringent of a level, then maybe you should consider trigger points earlier in that assessment process so that you could just reassess what was happening once a trigger point was reached, rather than scrambling to accomplish an immediate action because a trigger point was reached. But it is important that people on your fire, all resources on your fire or your incident, understand what the trigger points are so they can communicate them to you when that trigger point has been reached if you can't observe it directly.
I briefed everyone on the objectives, the plans, the backup plans, transition plans, and trigger points. Now they know I expect them to communicate to me if they see trigger point events happening, and I'll do the same for them. Better talk to dispatch and find out where those resources I ordered are.
All resources are subject to the effects of friction and fog, and this needs to be taken into account when it happens so you can adjust your plan accordingly. None of the resources have so many factors affecting them as the aviation community does, and they deserve special mention.
Over the course of my career, I've often seen times when plans have been hugely unsuccessful because the bulk of the plan was based around a critical aviation resource. Aviation is a fickle thing, so you may consider that you're going to bring all your people to your fire via helicopter, and then the next thing you know, your helicopter has a chip light. It can't fly for a day or two till they get the mechanic out to fix it. Then you better have a backup plan. If you don't, you're definitely not going to be able to accomplish the objective set forward by the land manager.
Copy, dispatch. I'm going to lose the Type 3 helicopter to a 100-hour inspection, and the heavy air tankers are now committed to another fire. Dispatch, I'd like to get a Type 1 crew ordered and a Type 2 helicopter, either standard or restricted, ordered as well. Now that the Type 1 crew is here, I'll have them break into squads and improve the point protection on the nest side and the corral, and then have them advance the hose lay up the flanks while going direct. The lookout has the radar app on his cell phone. It says the cold front may get here in 4 hours. I'll cross-check it with the weather. I'll put the word out to everybody about the timing of the front so they are ready to deal with it. I'll reassess how we're doing in a couple hours before the front gets here.
Being aware of where you are and accomplishing the benchmarks you have set up in your plan is critical in being able to judge how your plan is proceeding and if you need to reassess or change it.
Your primary plan that you have in place, are you accomplishing it? Are you getting the resources that you asked for? Are you building the line that you had assumed you could build with the resources that you have? Or are things falling behind? Is your plan heavily reliant on something that you don't have? I think the best thing to be aware of is just when you start to see small failures in your plan, that's when you really need to start reassessing.
The fire's starting to pick up and the squads are starting to see spot fires outside the lines. The fuel and terrain are really slowing them down. We're not going to catch this before that cold front gets here in an hour. Time to go to Plan B. We'll pull back and burn out around the point protection areas and make them really bomber, and they'll be closer to the safety zone if it rips when the front hits. I'll let everybody know.
Understanding what your trigger point is that will initiate a transition to an alternate posture helps to make that a timely decision, especially if you determine that hitting that trigger point is inevitable.
If you're needing to change plans, determining why do you need to change plans, are weather conditions changing? Is it burning into different terrain that you never expected it to burn into? Has your plan revolved around getting resources that now you're not able to get? That could determine whether or not you need to change your mode of action. And then also if the objectives of the land manager have changed.
The outflow of the cold front is really starting to make this thing run. Good thing I went ahead and had everyone put a foot in our safety zone before it got here. Looks like we'll be here for a while. I'll let dispatch and the duty officer know what is going on and see what direction the duty officer wants us to take after the fire lays down. Okay, everybody. The duty officer wants us to keep the fire from crossing the 2-track, and for the time being, we're going to let it run in the wilderness area until we get more resources to handle it. Let's start getting a plan together while it runs, and when it lays down, we can begin to engage it. All right, everyone. Fire's laying down, and we have a plan. We are back in the game.
A crisis can in some ways be considered as an abrupt and brutal audit. At a moment's notice, everything that was left unprepared becomes a complex problem, and every weakness comes rushing to the forefront. The ability to deal with a crisis situation is largely dependent on the structures that have been developed before chaos arrives.